All right, welcome folks to Difficult Conversations as part of Grow Your Mind series, brought to you by GROUNOW. I'm your host, Suraj Ethirajan, founder of GROUNOW. I help engineers and managers in software and hardware tech companies get unstuck and find balance in their career. I also guide them to break into better roles and to get the impact and purpose and income they deserve without working longer hours. I'm just excited to welcome our guest, and please join me in welcoming Andy Betts, who helps companies worldwide to optimize their field operations. As the creator of Icon 9 Systems and founder of Icon Solutions, he covers all aspects of technical sales, marketing, and applications engineering. Thank you, Andy, for joining us.
My pleasure.
Fantastic. So let's get started with this session. Difficult conversations, really excited about it. Andy, through your observations and experience, how do professionals associate with difficult conversations?
Well, I've seen quite a lot of unnecessary difficulties created by professionals being very impatient in difficult conversations and trying to achieve a lot very quickly. That's one classic overall thing, is that you're just trying to do too much. Less is often more in a difficult conversation. Once you've recognized it, you need to calm down, go slow until things have got back under control. And then after that, there's a lot of technique to know, and you find when they go wrong, what a lot of professionals do is slip into bad habits that are quite forgivable because they come from our culture, too much judgmental language, too many accusations, too much projection, that kind of thing. A lot of the ways in which it's more prudent to act are quite counterintuitive. So, you see a lot of struggling with difficult conversations out there.
Yeah, I think, very true. That's why difficult conversations. And today, I think what you're going to help us understand is how can these difficult conversations become conversations with the tools and mindset. Is that right?
That's essentially it, because the angle I've got on it is that the difficult conversation as a whole is just a conversation with objectives at the end. And what's making it difficult is somewhere in the middle, you've got too much emotion, stakes are too high, opinions are very high. Mm-hmm. And it's that thing you've got to deal with in order to transform the conversation back into a normal one where you can get a productive outcome. Yeah.
I see. Yeah, it's very true. And I think, this is perhaps a good time for those who are on the call to indulge in a very simple survey.
We've organized a couple of polls during the call, and it would be nice to do them because we can aggregate what we're doing with a call we had earlier.
Absolutely.
But don't hesitate to go off of mute and contribute to the conversation, because we've got a manageable number of people here. It'd be quite nice to hear from you.
Yeah, I think so too. And I see we have new people joining. There is, I'm going to put the link again in chat in case if it's not there already. Please go ahead and click that link and engage with us and answer a simple question. How do you approach difficult conversations now? Do you run away as fast as possible? Do you avoid them subtly? Are you cool about it, or do you run towards it? And we had someone in the first session who said that they actually run towards it.
Yeah, it was quite frightening, really. but both Satish and Peki, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, Peki, are cool about it, right? Yeah. So I'd be interested to know what you mean by cool. How do you, because these things do require a bit of interpretation. Could you tell us?
I wasn't sure really between what you mean by approaching difficult conversations. If I have to prepare for it, obviously it takes time to prepare. Whereas if it is evolving to be difficult, I don't know if I can say that I'll be cool about it, because I think that's the difference here. If you know that you have a difficult conversation coming up, then you have time to prepare, and you know what you want to say, and you can also anticipate what the other person is going to say, and that way the goal is to have a productive conversation there, because you're walking in that way. So as I said, that's the difference, that there are some situations I can say I can be cool about it, and some where I probably want to avoid it.
You make a very good point.
Getting out of control.
Yeah. And then you put your finger immediately on an important point. I mean, the thing that makes difficult conversations, characterizes difficult conversations, is the emotion involved. And if you've got some time to prepare, then you can generally bring those emotions under control and be a bit cooler. When they just happen and you weren't expecting it, it's a different story, of course. Yeah.
Cool.
Anyone else like to just comment on what they've on these 4 different options?
Or even curious to know if anyone has evolved over time where, a few years ago, I would have ran away from difficult conversations. And today, to Satish's point, I might, depending on the situation, approach it carefully. Definitely plan in advance when I anticipate a difficult conversation to happen. But there are many ways I think people can change over time, and of course, situationally as well. If anyone else wants to share their viewpoint, if not, we'll continue. But yeah, I appreciate the participation here, both verbally and through the survey.
Perhaps I mention one point to pick up on the question you asked me to start with about how do professionals approach difficult conversations. I do see quite a lot of subtle avoidance, your second option here. That is very common because, and kind of quite natural. I mean, a difficulty comes up and you know it's a difficult conversation because there's some kind of awkward feeling. But somehow what you do is deal with a side difficulty, something that isn't quite as difficult as the real core problem in order to be polite and not upset people and that sort of thing. So it's all well motivated, but the problem is if you do endeavor to be too much to be polite, then you aren't dealing with the core problem, which then comes back and hits you later on. So the classic example is, somebody turns up late for a meeting, and the obvious thing with that is to say something about the fact they're late. But often the problem is that they're turning up late regularly for meetings. Every time they turn up, they're late. And that is the issue to deal with. And it's a much more difficult one because it's probably behind it. You've got some kind of problem of respect for other people or motivation or something, right? But that's the difficult issue. But if you're trying to be polite, you just talk about, well, you're 10 minutes late, Fred, blah, blah, blah. And that kind of avoidance we do all the time, and it's that the skill of dealing with difficult conversations is to avoid avoidance.
And you talk about difficult conversations, but reading your blog, or if anyone else has read Andy's blog here, I think you talk about difficult exchanges as well. So,
okay.
What's that about? Like conversations and exchanges, what's different?
Well, that's a key thing that came out of working with a new course with a big multinational, and we were trying to teach middle level managers how to handle difficult conversations and particularly avoid avoidance in a very short amount of time. And we tried to base our work on nonviolent communication to start with, which is a terrific, discipline, a fantastic methodology, but it takes a long time to learn. And in the end, we realized that we had to just focus on one aspect of the difficult conversation, which is getting the conversation back to normal. So dealing with the emotions and all that stuff, so that you reestablish good communication, a trusting relationship, that kind of thing. And that in itself is quite a difficult message to get across, is that when you go into a difficult conversation, you're no longer trying to get to that objective you originally had for the conversation. The first thing you've got to do is deal with what I call the troll on the bridge. And the troll represents you kind of all the emotions and all the rubbish, that's in the way of you achieving anything together, and getting back to normal. I can show you the troll on the bridge.
Yeah,
actually.
Go ahead. I'll stop sharing and
let's have a look at the troll on the bridge. Here he is. So you see the bridge represents the difficult conversation, and getting off the bridge at the other end means achieving whatever objective you had for the conversation. So planning a big meeting or working out some project plan or whatever it is. But the troll represents this difficulty. So something is tough. Difficult conversations were described by the guys who wrote Crucial Conversations, a very good book on this, as being where there's a lot of emotion involved, stakes are high and opinions are high. And that's kind of what the troll represents, is that kind of difficulty that you've got. And so that's, let's see, that's going to work. So the troll is kind of the difficult exchange. It's dealing with all that difficult stuff to get back to a real conversation. And if you focus on that difficult exchange, then you can make a lot of progress with difficult conversations in a small amount of time, because it's a very specific kind of set of skills and methodology. And it doesn't involve all the negotiation and everything else that will get you off the bridge. I mean, all those things we know how to do once we're back in a normal conversation. So just by focusing on that difficult exchange and reestablishing trust, it actually helps, because it allows you to get these skills faster because they're more focused. Does that make sense?
Let me paraphrase here. You're saying instead of going and solving what you started out trying to achieve and obtain, when you encounter a troll, you pause and actually address the troll to begin with, which might be completely different than what you were trying to do to begin with. And I think that's
exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right.
To pause.
Yeah. Once you've dealt with the troll, you've reestablished trust, and you've got decent communication, and then whatever you were trying to deal with, you'll deal with as you would normally as a rational professional.
Yeah, and I think before we move forward and you expose some of the tools and good practices for people to steal from this conversation, maybe a final poll to understand what are some of the challenges that people have when it comes to difficult conversations and some things that actually work in their favor. So I'm going to request everyone's favor. And there's one more brief poll that I would like you guys to engage with us in. So give me a brief minute here. I'll go ahead and put it in the chat window. So go ahead and access the new link that I just shared in the chat window, and it's going to be a word cloud. I love these word clouds. They're dynamic, and especially when we run them live, it becomes pretty cool to check out. So you'll see some entries already there. They're from the previous session we had, but feel free to jump in. So what are some main challenges and mistakes in a difficult conversation? Either you do them or you've observed others do it. So what are some of those challenges that you have observed?
That's quite winging it.
Yeah.
That's the technique, is it? Right.
Emotions taking over, that can definitely happen. And I think regardless of whether you show it or not, if it's raging inside and if it's hurting you, that's a very big issue. And it doesn't help pouring those emotions out. This choice of words, some really cool ones here,
So I hope people won't mind if I ask for a couple of elaborations. Focus on the problem is an interesting comment. Could whoever put that just explain what they meant by that? What do you put behind that?
Hey, Andy, this is Becky.
Hi.
So I put that in. I know through a lot of difficult conversation trainings and also critical conversation, we talk about focusing on the problem rather than focusing on the person.
Yeah.
You kind of start that conversation with how I feel about the problem, and then try to be as open and as possible so that the person who is receiving it can hopefully be less defensive and explain themselves. So you kind of start off with not making a conclusion on what you think it could be. So that's what I think would be focusing on the problem. But I also added the other challenge here, which is being defensive. And I think it's a natural behavior for us to first be defensive, regardless of what we hear. We always filter words the way our brain finds it most appropriate. And in some of the difficult conversations I've had, no matter how prepared I am to focus on the problem or what I think is a problem, the recipient would typically come in with very high defensive mode. And it takes a while to bring that wall down. And that conversation usually will take a longer time than just, addressing a simple problem like what you gave as an example, right? You're always late for the meeting. It's easy to say, I feel like this is not appropriate. In certain meetings, it was disruptive. But the moment you say something like that, that wall of defensiveness comes up, right?
Yeah. I completely agree with you. Because a great deal of the skill involved in dealing with a difficult conversation is to avoid provoking someone, and this defensive reaction, this self-justification, this resistance and so on, these are things that are so easy to provoke. And it can take the tiniest gesture or the smallest mistake in the way you say something, and boom, the troll gets bigger and you're really stuck. So, and as you say, focusing on the problem is another way of saying avoid being aggressive. Cool things down, focus, try and take the emotion out, try to be rational, for all the reasons you described. So thank you, Becky. That's very useful. What else do we have? It's becoming quite a nice word cloud now. Misunderstandings, of course. Suresh, which one would you pick out as being?
I think the help that many people need are assumptions. So my opinions might be my fact, and what I'm assuming, I think I have all the data to support my assumptions, but a lot of the times that's not the case. I want to I want us to kind of dig deep into that. So how do you assume, if you knew you're assuming, and if it's wrong, you wouldn't do it? What about scenarios where you think you know the information is supposedly right? Then how do you approach it? How do you capture?
Let me show you another one, because it picks up both on your question there and what Becky was just saying.
Mm-hmm.
So hold on, actually, that's one. That's it. So this is just a couple of slides we've got from the training course on how to deal with trolls. You're trying to focus on the problem, which is, in other words, the facts, the experiences, really what's happening, okay? And the traps you can fall into in terms of trying to express something coolly as a factual problem are classified here as three things. And you mentioned assumptions, right? So I've classified under suppositions. You've got assumptions where you say things. The trouble is with these things is you don't say, I assume that, right? The danger is when you disguise an assumption as a fact, or we disguise a judgment as a fact, or we disguise a rule as a fact. So, they said this, therefore they're going to do that, is an assumption. Or, the data says this, therefore, so-and-so will do that. It's stated as a fact, but it's not necessarily true. And the reason it's dangerous is because when you say an assumption, the other person immediately realizes that, they're sensitive, they're wound up, they're emotional, that they'll pick on that as a point of argument. No, I don't agree, blah, blah, blah. So if you're going to try to avoid provoking people, you really need to steer away from these three traps. I mean, there are some good examples here on the way in which you can very easily make a judgment without kind of realizing that you're doing it. Very often we'll say it's important that so and so happens, such and such a thing happens, because it seems like a very easy, simple thing to say. You believe it's important, but it's a belief. Huh? It's not an actual fact. Something's slow, something's late. You'd be surprised at how quickly people can disagree. And any excuse, if you're feeling defensive, resistive, will be used to disagree. It only takes the wrong word. Okay.
So going to your example about someone coming in late to a meeting, and that's a repeating pattern, what would be a good way to express both your feelings about it, as well as expressing what you would like them to do going forward? So what would be a good response to someone who shows up late?
Well, first of all, you've got to make the conversation safe for the other person. So if they're turning up late for a meeting, there are lots of other people around, that may not be the right moment to attack it. But perhaps as the meeting ends, you could take the person aside and say, look, I want to talk to you about being late, because for the past three occasions you've been late. So, and that's just a fact. And so what's it all about? And see what the other person has got to say to start with. Okay. Now, the other point you raised is, then what do you say in order to get them to do the right thing going forward? Right? Well, that's the objective coming off the bridge. Okay, and until you've got the other person to talk, and the trust between you is reestablished, and they've expressed why they're late, you've understood what they do next. We'll have to wait. The trouble on the bridge is the fact they're turning up late. You feel annoyed about it. They, for some reason, don't feel they need to come to. There's a lot of rubbish going on, and that's got to be dealt with first, and then the plan for the next meetings can be dealt with. But by then you're in a normal conversation. So,
okay, I think this is perhaps a good time to switch to the slide where you actually talk about the process of how to navigate.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it gives people something tangible and something to steal away that they can use. So I'll take snapshots. We'll share information.
You don't need to do that because it's in the blog. There are 2 papers in the blog so far. If I live long enough, there'll be 7 in the end.
Thank you for putting up energy and effort. So I did put in the chat window a link to Andy's blog. Definitely check it out. So for the images,
I do think this is a nice takeaway, because this is a result of a lot of work to try and take a very complete discipline, which is nonviolent communication, and make it something that you can learn to do useful things with in a very short amount of time. It takes a week or 2 to get anywhere with nonviolent communication, whereas a couple of days on this and you're really making progress. So the flow is pause, say, invite, listen. So the first thing is you're going to need some time to get your emotions under control, but also to identify the real difficulty so that you're not avoiding things, and to work out how you intend to deal with this troll. Okay. And remember, dealing with the troll is not the same as getting whatever you want the other side of the bridge. Dealing with the troll is about getting the conversation back to normal. So that's the pause bit. And as Satish pointed out at the beginning, if you've got time to prepare, the pause isn't too easy because you've got the time. When something comes up in the middle of what you thought was a normal conversation, the pause is really important. I need to take 5 seconds deep breathing and work all this stuff out on the fly. That's not so easy. So pause, and then the say part is what you say. And there are 3 icons there, which are the disciplines of observing factually, focusing on the problem, in other words, but also expressing how you feel and what you need in a non-violent way that is not going to make the other person explode, become defensive, and so on. Rather, will encourage them to do the same. Invite is encourage them to speak. One of the other, coming back again to your first question, Suresh, which was, what do you see people do? Well, the other very common fault I see, or mistake I see people committing, is being too prepared. In fact, if a difficult conversation is coming up, okay, so you're telling bad news to one of your customers, or you're telling one of your team members they're not going to get a rise or something, you rehearse the conversation in your head again and again and again. And so eventually when you actually get to the contact time, you come out with all this stuff and you don't let the other person speak. And it's much more effective to just kick the conversation off and then invite the other person to respond, listen, and then adjust what you're going to say. And again and again, I see people try and dominate the conversation for far too long before they invite the other person to speak, and therefore they get any feedback. So that is pretty key. So the end of the loop is to invite and then listen, and you listen for facts and you listen empathetically for the way the other person feels. That's the 2 sides of the icon. If everything's fine, you're off, into a normal conversation again, and that's the smiley guy going up in the picture. If there's still work to do, you continue around the loop. And the last one is something we often neglect in training, which is sometimes this ain't going to work. You're up against a real problem, somebody that wants to do you harm, and you should abort. I mean, there are situations where you can't fix it. And so the little man going off to the right as well, I've tried, I've listened to what the guy's saying. I don't reckon I'm going to make this. And you either, it's fight or flight. You either escalate, and try and get the thing fixed by somebody with a bit more power. You go back up to your manager, or you simply get out of there. You withdraw, run away. So that's a quick overview of the flow. And I mentioned that if I live long enough, I'll write some papers on this. And so you'll see there's a couple of blogs on this basic flow, and each of those icons will be elaborated a bit more in an article at some point in the future. So.
I like this flow, Andy, and I think I want to dive into 2, and then also open up to the audience to ask questions.
Yeah.
The one that you ended.
So Rich, before you get there, I just want to say that, Andy, I really like the fact that you pointed out about the abort portion of it, because I think especially in the professional world, we're so used to having arguments or conversations in our personal life that we want to have the completeness to it. And we imagine that when we're in a professional setting, we should always start and end our conversation and achieve the end goal. So ending a incomplete conversation feels like you have failed. But I think it's a key skill to kind of know when is the right time to say enough is enough. It could be enough for now, or it could be something that is just not worth pursuing because doors are already shut, right? And it's okay if that happens. No damage will continue to be done. The world is not going to end. The company is not going to shut down for that matter. But knowing when to stop, I think that's also a very key skill.
Yeah, it is. And any scheme that leaves it out is really dangerous, actually, because you're inviting people into the trap of thinking that they've always got to succeed, like you say. I mean, think of the big one, where, Putin and the European Union recently, right? Perhaps should have got out of there a bit quicker. So, and of course, there are conversations like that. Look, I don't think it's the majority, but it's it is an important point.
Yeah, that was a brilliant point, Becky. In fact, you can't steal the words out of my mouth. It was the same thing that happened in session 1 we don't have to win every single situation. We don't need an answer for everything. Hopefully those two phrases, Becky, kind of resonated with what you were saying. And I think chasing perfection seems to be a very dangerous thing. People want answers for everything, but you don't need that.
Yeah, and win is an overstatement these days, where we perceive winning means you have the upper hand or you're stronger. But that's not always, that doesn't have to be the case. That's old school.
No, it doesn't. Yeah, and in fact, winning actually, in the sense of win-lose, long term is not what you want at all. There's very typical situation if you've got technical arguments. Somebody puts forward their case, the other person puts forward their case, goes to and fro a bit, and then one side wins. In other words, the decision goes with them. What happens? The other side ends up feeling pretty bad, right? And the next opportunity they get to get their revenge, they will. So it's not really winning in the long term. And so that has to be borne in mind as well. There's a good book called Getting to Yes by Fisher and Uri, and their approach is win-win or no deal. This is for commercial business-to-business negotiations. And the idea is, there's no point beating your client, right? Because it doesn't work in the long run. So it's even better than win. It's better than just win-win, because you refuse to go into any deal unless it is genuinely beneficial for both sides.
Yeah, and I think, Andy, you had an example where there was a role reversal in a particular company that you worked with, or there was an example that you were aware of, where the HR person and perhaps the engineer switched roles, and then they continued the argument. And then the engineer was able to. Do you know which story I'm talking about? This is the one that you shared with me some time ago, with the engineer.
Oh, yeah, I remember it.
Yeah. Do you mind walking the audience through that example?
Oh, that was yeah. Okay. Well, that was about honesty and this business of when we're in a conversation, you're focused on the problem, you're expressing feelings and needs. It's important to be honest. But on the other hand, brutal honesty is also dangerous, because other people aren't necessarily in a position to receive all your honesty. If the arguments are too hard and too brutal, some people can take them and appreciate actually the facts, and other people will get upset. And so the thing that Suresh is thinking about is we did a role play once with one person was an engineer, one was DRH, and the engineer managed to put together these steamroller arguments that were absolutely incontrovertible. I mean, they were fantastic arguments, and so he won. And so at the end of the role play, I asked him how he felt, and he felt fine. It seemed logical to him. He'd gone through the reasoning. That was okay. And so I turned to the DRH person. So, how do you feel, Rachel? You've been absolutely crushed. And it's an example of, well, the engineer was right, but it's not about being right. You've got to try and this business of dealing with the troll is about re-establishing the relationship and trust. It's not about crushing the other person and getting what you want. But that was particularly marked example, because you had somebody with a tremendous scientific baggage who was able to put all these clever arguments together, and somebody that just wasn't armed in the same way. And the engineer's got a responsibility not to do harm, right, and to listen to the other person with empathy and see what's going on and see at what point they've got to stop.
Yeah, my second question, Andy, the first one was exactly what Becky had asked, but the second one, in the diagram that you had, you also talked about say. One was observation, but then the other two pieces on communicating your feelings and then asking for your needs. Do you mind doing a deeper dive there? How do you communicate your feelings and ask for your needs? I think the third piece was very instrumental, where I would, in the past, not do that third piece.
Yeah. Okay. Well, to keep things simple, expressing, the facts and your feelings and what you need should be done in the same way. In other words, be done as accurately as possible. So when I say, express facts accurately, it's quite easy to agree because, we're trained as scientists, and the reason that is the right way to do it is for the reasons that we discussed earlier. It doesn't trigger off defense. It shouldn't trigger off defensive reactions and so on. Now, the interesting thing is if you apply exactly the same principle to expressing your feelings and needs, you end up with the same benefit. You don't trigger other people's reactions in the same way. So how do you do it? Well, an accurate expression of a feeling is, I am upset, I am angry, I'm sad, I'm not feeling very good. Okay. And this is very different to saying that now I'm up, that has upset me, or because of this I feel bad, or they've made me feel lousy, or something. Because those things are not actually facts, they're kind of accusations. If you just stay in the first person and say exactly what you feel, nobody can actually disagree with you. They can't. If I say to you, Suresh, I'm feeling angry, you can't really contradict me. I mean, there's no machine on the planet that can look at me and say, well, no, you're not angry, Andy. It's something else, right? I'm the only one that knows whether I'm angry or sad or whatever. Okay. And if you stick to that kind of way of expressing things, then you're safe. And it's very hard to do, and it's very unusual for people to do it. We had a good example recently where on a course, we asked people to give us some examples of difficult conversations with customers, and actually use them to build film scenarios as it happened. So we played the thing out, and after it was played out, the guy who'd suggested this scenario related that his idea had come from a real situation where a general manager had been with a customer, and they had dealt with it by basically, this customer basically told them that they were in big trouble with them and nothing was going right, and the millions of dollars they put into fixing these problems had gone nowhere. And so the general manager said, well, I'm angry and I'm disappointed, and our department has invested X million into this, and I had to convince my managers to do that, and now I'm going to have to go back and tell them what you just told me, and I need a way to do that. So if you listen carefully to what she said, none of those things are accusing. It's exactly what happened. It's exactly how she feels. It's exactly what she needs. And I think it's the best way to explain what we're trying to do here. You can express some very strong emotions, some very deep needs, without triggering other people's emotions, if you do it with great care and as accurate as possible. And this means essentially showing a bit of vulnerability and taking responsibility for how you feel and so on, and being prepared to cope with how the other person reacts. Okay. Now, this general manager was particularly mature person, well-developed person, and did it naturally. It's not the sort of thing you want to go and try for fun the next time you're in a meeting with your N+2. But it is where I think we all need to go.
And I think that's the point, Andy, right? It's, you have these tools, practice in a safe place, practice with friends and family, with colleagues you trust. And the more you keep doing this over time, it becomes natural and not forced. Is that
yeah, that's very, very important. Yeah. These are not things that you can just turn on overnight and it works. You have to take some of the ideas. I mean, there's a complete flow. I showed you a complete flow earlier on, but you can just take some of the ideas from it and try that out. And so, and by the way, the most difficult practice arena is your family. That's you can do it with your family that you made, right? There's no problem.
So I know we had a few people come in and out. The second poll that we had only the first question out of the two. So I'm going to encourage people to go back to that poll. Let me see. I'm putting the link again in the chat. So please go there again, and hopefully you haven't turned off your window. This was after the word cloud. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And there's a second question here. What are the key qualities needed to manage difficult conversations? Now, some of it can be your own, and some of it can also be the ones that Andy alluded to and shared in detail here. So please share with us. Use the same link. Let me know in chat, or just speak up and tell me if the link is working, not working, and then we'll go from there. But I'd like to see what are some of the things that work for you. And I see the word cloud is changing, so people are adding to this. Thank you, folks. I see more changes and updates.
Give importance to de-escalation. Yes, de-escalation is taming the troll. Be clear.
You see the big ones, Andy?
Yeah,
They're
the big one
listening
is
and
empathy.
empathy.
And that's very, very good, because I
Right.
think listening is the key. There's a kind of combination of two things that are alluded to in here. One is have a clear purpose. There's there's something about intent there, but if you have a clear purpose and start off with the right intent with regards to the troll, you know, how you're going to get back to a normal conversation, and then you listen, you should be all right. There are a lot of other things that you can do that will help, but those two things together are really the key, because if you know what you're trying to do, no matter what obstacles come up, you know, what unexpected things are said and so on, if you're listening carefully and you know where you're trying to go, you will adjust and you will get there. Okay, so the right intentions plus listening are really, really key.
And I take patience as another form of, when you say dial in your diagram that you had the dial, so the patience is what allows you to also dial down and pivot off of the new intent. The original intent is getting from point A to point B, but once you hit the troll, that patience allows you to identify that you have a new momentarily in time.
Yeah, that's right. You've got to first of all deal with that troll. So your intention's got to be reassure the troll or do whatever's needed to get back to trust. Yeah.
And I really like the other one here, Andy, the one on assuring safe place. And I think that comes where it's very important. I don't know the person who wrote it or with what intent, but it's creating a safe place for not just the other person, but also yourself or everyone involved. It's not just one-dimensional. I think that's very important. A lot of the times, even when you express the feelings, if you take care of other person's feelings and intent while you take care of yours, that is a mutual win-win. Any imbalance there, I believe, would set off in the wrong course.
If there isn't safety, then there's fear, isn't there? And fear is either, actually, very often it's not shown as fear. It comes out in the form of aggression, and so assuring a safe place is very key.
The thing that perhaps I need better understanding is as much as possible. So what are the key qualities needed to manage difficult conversations? So if anyone in this session wrote as much as possible in our...
I have a feeling that's half a comment. It was a comment that was broken in half somewhere. Practice as much as possible? Is that what it was?
I'm not sure.
Breathe as much as possible? Anybody?
Empathize, listen as much as possible.
Yeah, it could be, couldn't it?
Anyways, de-escalation, that's another really cool thing. But it's hard to do. But I think once you're patient, you're able to address the troll and then move on. So that de-escalation needs to happen. And maybe back to the point that Pekiel's brought up, not everything needs to be figured out. Maybe not always, even in your diagram, Andy, it's not always that you end up crossing the bridge. There are places where you need to know that it's not worth crossing, isn't it?
Yeah. The other interesting one is cultural differences, which is a bit of an outlier in a sense. I'd be quite interested to know what you had in mind, whoever wrote that. Thoughts on cultural differences, because any specific type of difference that there's lots of different types of culture in the sense of there's company culture, national culture, and so on. Would anybody like to own up?
Yeah.
No, you're all on mute, so if you're talking already, then you need to come off of mute.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I can now, yep.
Okay, well, I didn't write that, but I've seen where certain cultures, they speak much more directly, where others, they, like in the US particularly, we kind of flower our speech and we try to explain things a bit more, where other countries, cultures, they speak a lot more directly. And so sometimes that causes, misunderstanding because it's taken, the way the speaking is being taken as meaning something more than what the words are being said. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. It does make sense, yeah. I think the only way to deal with it, obviously if you know a culture particularly well, then you can pick up the signs more easily, but it still comes down to the same thing, I think, and that you listen and check that whatever you said was received as you meant it to be received. But absolutely right. I mean, there's some terrific research by a guy called Hofstede on this, that he did in IBM across the world, because he was in one company culture, he was able to kind of neutralize the effect of company culture and see the difference between China, Japan, Britain, the US, Israel, and so on. And that's quite fascinating. There are indeed those differences that you talk about. And directness is one of the most the clearest ones. Some cultures are much more direct than others. Okay.
I think there was one other comment or question. Just wait for a brief moment for people to come off of mute. If not,
yeah.
Okay. Cool. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing. I will share all the results with folks, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, Andy, did you have anything else to share in terms of key takeaways, other tools or concepts that they can leverage moving forward?
Yeah, sure. I mean, watch the space for a dive down into each of these different things. As I say, try just one thing at a time and see how you get on with it. And if you ever want to discuss it or give feedback or ask questions, do. But in terms of takeaways, I would say very, very important to focus on the troll. Don't be too impatient. Just get back to trust. That's the first thing. Focus on that troll to start with, and address the core problem, so that you're not avoiding subtly and unknowingly the problem. And after that, it is a question of developing the techniques that will allow you not to provoke the other person. You don't want that flare up. If you're in a sensitive, highly emotionally charged environment, it's really quite tricky to avoid that defensive reaction. And that's where you have to really do deliberate practice, developing the skills so that you avoid any of this provocative language that comes so easily to us all. There you go.
Thank you, Andy. Any closing questions or comments for either Andy, myself, or for each other?
Don't forget you're all on mute. So
I have to say that in the years of being in the management role, it does apply that practice makes perfect.
Yeah.
As much as it's not something I look forward to, but it can get better. But it will not be less painful. I had some really bad ones, and I think I just learned from it, and hopefully I'll never make the same mistakes before again. But I think practice does make perfect or progress.
Yeah, I quite agree. Practice, especially if you can talk about your practice with close colleagues or with a rubber duck or something, and kind of so that you do learn from those painful experiences, because you don't want to go through it again and again.
Yeah. Andy, just very quickly, you talked about the rubber duck, and I thought that was a brilliant idea. You've done this with other clients, where maybe you want to elaborate for people who don't know.
You don't know about the rubber. Well, the rubber duck is simply, talking to something like a rubber duck or your dog or something, so that you go through the process of expressing yourself. Okay. So we developed a culture of rubber ducks, because when you, like I'm doing now, when you try to explain things, you inevitably organize them better in your own mind. So when you go through some of these experiences, talking to a friend or or a rubber duck, or sending an email to somebody, because then you've got to work out the arguments clearly. That is all part of the process of learning from experience.
How much of writing notes with pen and paper would you add to that? Is that
so I really think it's a question of your personal preference. I do a lot of the writing notes things. I take a notebook with me when I go cycling. I sit down and have a coffee and just write stuff out, and it helps. But your brain's a funny thing, right? And it needs that expression thing in order to organize itself a bit.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thanks for saying that there are many personalized safe spaces that we can practice all of this stuff.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very cool. Alrighty. I do want to thank you. This has been another great session. Session number 2 is also really good. Any closing comments or questions from folks? Else I would like to go ahead and thank our speaker here. Ready? Okay, cool. Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining for another Grow Your Mind series brought to you by GROUNOW. And Andy, always a pleasure. I learned from you in these calls, even outside. And thank you all for attending as well. And as always, 3 lucky random participants will get a $10 gift card to show our thanks to you guys. We'll also send out a survey for you to rate the topic, the way we present, the way we organize. So share your feedback. It's going to be very helpful for us to promote, the next Tech Talk, and share it with you. If you have other topics that you'd like to hear, please let us know. And then at the end, wishing you all great learning, joy, and success. And stay tuned for the recording to be posted on the YouTube channel. And you'll get an email regarding the same.
Thank you all very much. It's very nice talking with you this evening. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.